The understanding of how we are family comes through food.
As every farmer knows, efficiency is an important equation that you can't ignore. But I think there are a lot of misconceptions about efficiency.
There's a hunger on the part of consumers for food that's produced by folks they know.
Where the seeds come from is the number one thing that I'm thinking is a key to lead to sustainability.
Key Ingredients is funded by a grant from the North Dakota Humanities Council, a nonprofit, independent state partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and by the members of Prairie Public.
The sitting down and eating together is as important to the health as the food itself. What happens with food selection and food preparation and food planning really is culture.
From a spiritual understanding of our relationship with food, we have to first recognize that the fundamental understanding of what constitutes family is who do you eat with. So from a spiritual respect, the understanding of how we are family, how we are community, comes through food.
Let this food to us be blessed.
We say grace, or we give thanksgiving to God 3 times a day for our daily food. Now, we don't say thanks to God for any other commodity, so to speak, but we do thank God for the food. And so it's at our very base relationship with God, being the food provider, the ultimate provider of our life, that what sustains us in life. The connection is strong.
We need to say thank you at the table for our food and what the earth has provided us. There is a system in place. You know, we come to the earth and we leave the earth at a certain time, and the decisions we make in between those dates is really important. And food, we make food decisions at a minimum 3 to 5 times a day.
Hey, come here, there's a whole bunch right here, see?
Food and the gift of food has been extremely important to us as people. You know, we grew up in a really poor household, financially wise. We had no money, but we were rich in the fact that we had our gardens, and when people came over, we fed them. And that was the custom in the old days. That's how you show respect for your people. That's how you adopt your relatives as well. The first thing you do is you feed them and you give them gifts. The garden is a huge part of our identity and always has been. Not only our identity, it's part of our spirituality. It's part of who we are as human beings. And so the foods were extremely well respected. The foods were alive. The foods had spirit because it kept us healthy. And we never had the obesity you find today because of the government foods that we got later on. What you can hear from the women of our nation is that they were considered the children. And especially when they start growing up in their gardens, they would consider them the children. They would sing lullabies and they would pray and they would talk. And I can remember my mother doing that when I was a kid. I remember going out there and we were weeding the garden and she would be singing to them and talking to them. And so those were very sacred items for us. They were part of our family. They were part of us as spiritual beings because we believed that they were alive.
Unfortunately, our modern society has broken down that relationship. Families don't eat together as they used to. Fast food and convenience food has replaced that relationship that we've had in dining together, in spending time together, where the dining room table is a time when we reconstitute the family.
We are a nation of overfed and undernourished people. Very undernourished, eating large quantities of factory or science-made food. If we're going to change, everybody talks about obesity. It's not an obesity epidemic. It's an epidemic of not having food traditions in our home. It's an epidemic of not eating smart and not moving more.
The food system needs to be a just system because it is very fundamental to the survival of humanity. And we're not creating that justice. When someplace between 800 and a little over 1 billion people go hungry every night, it tells us that our food system does not serve humanity.
My message is always that food is more than something to eat. Food impacts all of the components of our being, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And if we want a strong society, a strong community, our public health message is plan your food, sit together, thank someone for the food, and use it as an opportunity to connect and bond with the people you care about.
As every farmer knows, efficiency is an important equation that you can't ignore. But I think there are a lot of misconceptions about efficiency. We have this notion somehow that the bigger you get, the more efficient you become. That there's that almost locked-in relationship. And so if you aren't going to get bigger, you're going to be less efficient, and therefore you're not going to survive.
Something that's efficient has little wasted motion and produces an outcome with a minimal effort. The goal of that is to conserve energy and avoid waste. But the efficiencies that are gained in the economic system, especially in the food system, have the reverse effect.
And I started to think about, some of my friends who farm, who now are farming 25,000 acres. Well, you figure at that rate, you ought to really be efficient, right? But at least 1/4 section of one of my friends who farms 25,000 acres is 100 miles from the farm. It takes a lot more energy and time, et cetera, to plant and harvest that 1/4 section than the one that's next to the farmstead. So you start to lose efficiencies as you get larger.
The problem is not technology, it's our use and our philosophy of technology, that there is no limits to what we can do. So if we have a problem, we will just apply technology and overcome that problem. Economic efficiency can measure cost benefits in economic terms, but some of the costs and benefits that we have to consider are not economic and they can't be quantified. For example, how do you know if somebody is happy? Okay, how do you measure that in quantifiable terms? How do you measure the value of the work that earthworms do in the soil? What is the economic value of the beauty of a native prairie? Okay? We can't put these things into an accounting ledger, tally it up, and say, we have economically achieved this in the most efficient way possible, because it can't measure that for us. There's no tool to do that.
Where we're at right now is 75% of our total food and agriculture is being produced by just 195,442 farms in this country. And 30% of those farmers are over age 65, and only 5% are under age 35.
In America right now, 2% of Americans make their living by farming. So that means that 98% of Americans are in the consumer end of the equation on this one. So we've got a very small sector actually producing and a large sector looking for their next fix. And I worry over that if we don't get more people understanding and participating in the producing end of this equation, that one of these days we'll go to the supermarket and there's not going to be something for our next fix. And then what are we going to do? So if we think about the economic efficiency of two farmers farming the same amount of land that 30 farmers used to be able to farm. It's more economically efficient if 2 guys and 2 tractors can do that job instead of 30 guys doing that job. So on a strict balance scale, okay, just costs, inputs, and output, we say that is definitely more economically efficient. The problem is that we didn't ask what the goal was. Okay? The goal was never economic efficiency. The goal was things that matter to people. And when people are asked about what is it that you really love or value about life, they don't say economic efficiency. They say things like, I want to be able to put my kids through college. I want them to have a better life than I had. I want to be able to get together with my neighbors and live in a safe community. You know, I want my kids to be able to go to a good public school. So what is the implications of just having 2 farmers where there was once 30? Suddenly your kid has to travel 60 miles round trip to get to a town that has a school anymore. You've lost 30 families in your community. So now the businesses like the hardware store, the restaurants now aren't economically viable anymore. So these are things that we don't often measure by economic efficiency, and we can't measure. But we need to keep those values and goals front and center and keep economic efficiency in its place.
Efficiency isn't a measure of happiness. It may be a measure of the opposite of happiness. So I think what we need to become, rather than talking about efficient food systems, is we should talk about food systems that make us happy. And raising a garden and sharing your produce with your neighbor makes me happy. And having a food system that produces local nutritious food that I can buy, still affordable prices, makes a lot of people happy. So that would be my advice to people, is get off the word efficient and talk about systems that make us happy and healthy.
Farmers have historically been the keepers of the seed and have been the plant breeders. Many of the varieties, for instance, in the Oscar Will catalog, were varieties that were accessed from people, native peoples. They were indigenous to this landscape, and native people had been cultivating them for hundreds of years.
The seeds were harvested in the fall, along with all the other, with the corn and the squash and the other vegetables. I used to watch my mother do this. She would select the strongest, firmest, straightest ears and set them aside. And like with the corn, they were specific purposes. There was a softer corn that they used and they ground. And when they ground that up, when it was ripe, they would roast it and then grind it and put it with tallow and berries, choke cherries or June berries. The choke cherries they'd be ground up to, and they'd make corn balls. And those were food for when they went out and lasted them throughout the winter.
I want that one. Can you pick it for me? Wow, thank you.
Traditional gardening of the Nuata or Mandan is almost gone now. There are elements of it left, and it'll just become an historical artifact.
The ideal situation would be to have all of our families again have gardens. And I think many, many, many people do. But a lot of us are raising contemporary seeds. And I really believe that it'd be great to have another garden of traditional seeds. And I am encouraging all of our Indian people, if you have seeds, to dig them out. See if they're good. Don't put them all in the ground, but put half of them in there maybe. Some of my earliest seeds the earliest seeds I have are listed as 1798 as my earliest batch I got, and I got 14 seeds. I haven't grown them in any place, I'm scared.
The selection process that we have done has been nothing more than what farmers and gardeners have done for millennia, and really is the base for all of the good food crops that we have today, is all the work that was done before us.
Basically what I do on this farm is I grow and evaluate fresh vegetables, and I also run a small seed business. primarily heirloom seeds, and then more recently focusing on garden seeds on contract to seed companies and seed catalogs. So if I'm thinking, if my farm is to be sustainable, where the seeds come from is the number one thing that I'm thinking is a key to lead to sustainability. I'm not saying every farmer needs to raise his own seeds, although at one point in time that was a very common practice right where we're at out here in the prairies. Everybody saved their own seeds. If you look at the old farmsteads, there's granaries and there's seed cleaners in those. But typically with the consolidation in the seed industry, not only in cereal grains but in vegetables and everything else, there's been less seed saving. And some of that's due to patenting and laws that we have to abide by too. So I think one good way to look to be sustainable then is to be able to have seeds adapted and be able to continue, because that farm can continue if you can continually harvesting seeds.
We developed seed production, organic vegetable seed production. It's been a passion of mine for many years, gardening and saving seeds, and I developed some varieties in our garden, and so we just went with that.
As we develop more local and regional food systems and address the issues of food security, we also need to address the issues of seed security. That is, in fact, where our food comes from.
There was a time when seeds weren't patented, and it's really only fairly recent that they have been able to patent seeds or any life form. And my fears have been realized that it has resulted in consolidation in the seed industry and less choice for consumers.
Seed is relegated to being bought and sold, period. It cannot be shared, it cannot be saved, it cannot be freely distributed, and it denies people social, political, and economic access to seed.
I think it's very important to preserve the genetics found in older varieties. I think a lot of the old varieties of vegetables set the standard for quality, taste, and nutritive value, storability, all the things that were valued in times past. If, as seed growers, seed selectors, seed savers, if we focus on those things, that produces good food for healthy bodies, for healthy spirits, and what more as a human community could we ask of our food? I think that's just a great thing to strive for.
There's a hunger on the part of consumers for food that's produced by folks they know. It also tells me that there is a social desire for consumers to get together with these producers, because one of the cool things about farmers markets is not just about going and buying food. It's about talking to the producer about how the food was raised, it's about celebrating life, and it's about socializing. And it was eye-opening to me as Ag Commissioner to see these sorts of things unfold even in very small towns across North Dakota. I mean, we had maybe 4 or 5 years before I was no longer Ag Commissioner, we maybe had 10 or 12 farmers markets around the state. In just a period of 4 or 5 years, that number moved up to well over 50, close to 60 farmers markets that were established with regular places of doing business, regular hours. That's rapid growth.
3 1/4 of the carrots. And a lot of young people who want to go into farming now and are going into farming all across the country are very smart. They're not afraid of complexity. And the important thing is that they're really not interested in raising corn and soybeans. They want to raise food for people. So you could begin to see some changes in communities where you have more community people working together to produce more of their own food from their own resources. And that food will be obviously local, and then people will know where it comes from. And you could see a whole new, different kind of community culture evolve out of that.
I left the Bismarck-Mandan area around the age of 20, and I left with a love for farming because I worked here on my uncle's farm. and I met a man who happened to be a farmer as well and have a love for farming, and we decided to start a family.
She had this idea, hey, there's this family land and it's not really being used by the family right now. Maybe we could lease it, and so here we are.
I was hoping there might be some strawberries.
You know what? There's only 1 billion. Do you want a bag? CSAs are really wonderful, and in my opinion, they are the perfect marriage between consumers and farmers.
But here's some pimentos.
I took your advice last time, and like you said, just eat them raw.
Yeah.
They are. It's like candy.
Isn't it amazing?
CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. Here at Riverbound Farm, our CSA members get to come out to the farm once a week for 17 weeks, which is as long as our summer season was, mid-June through mid-October, and pick up whatever they want that's available for that week. And they can also do pick your own things. And one of the great things about CSAs is share the bounty, share the risk.
As soon as we got here, there was like a whole group of people who were like, hey, we're so glad you're here. You know, we've been waiting for this. And so that's been nice. And that, I mean, that's why North Dakota is a good place, I guess, for us. Also, North Dakota is an agricultural state, and there's a lot of people here who grew up on farms and now live in some sort of urban or suburban setting, and so are sort of separated from that, and they crave it.
A small farmer who's marketing their goods through a CSA helps ensure themselves a customer base for the entire season. And as a consumer, you're ensuring yourself local, fresh, high quality food raised right here in your community by your neighbor. You're keeping your money in the community, and you're ensuring your neighbor a good living. You can go out to the farm, you can shake hands with the farmer, and you can be a part of that. And that's something that we are really trying to develop here at Riverbound Farm. We are inviting our members to be a part of the farm.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
See ya.
Farming now is really tough because a lot of the small farmers are older, retiring, their children don't want to farm, and so the farms are bought up by larger farmers and they're turned into, you know, crop farms. They're not diversified any longer. But we see our farm with the diversity showing our children that it's okay to do something different. And if they want to come back here and live, they don't necessarily have to do what we did. And it's okay. You know, they can come and turn it into a paintball arena if they want to, you know, if they want to live here and develop that. You know, we have 3 sons and none of them are real farmer orientated, but they like to be out here and their friends like to come out here. And so it's okay, you know, we give them permission by our example and just by conversation that if they want to live here, they can come here and live here, and they don't have to do the traditional farming.
I think there's a lot of potential for being food providers, direct food providers. Even here in Langdon, people don't really think about it. And yet, we're able to provide a food source. I mean, it isn't a total food source, but at least a small niche to that food source. People are saying, well, gee, I'm really thankful that I got to know you because now I'm eating better because I know where my food's coming from, or I started my own garden now because of you guys or whatever. And I think that is a certain sense of accomplishment.
It's a process that you go through, and you just hope that, you know, your kids will come and stay here or live here, or some other young person that thinks it's cool here. Not necessarily your own kids, but your farm doesn't have to be huge to allow you to make a living. You can have a living. You may not make, you know, millions of dollars. You won't make millions of dollars, I can tell you that, but, you know, you'll have a good lifestyle. And that's, I think, what has been the most important thing for us in raising our kids and living here.
It isn't just production that matters. You can have huge production of commodities and not have a good society. It takes people to make a good society. And the family farm system of agriculture produces a really good society. focusing on that brings a bit of the focus back to the people and not just the statistics.
North Dakota has a rural heritage. It's a rural state and there's a lot of farmers. And North Dakota farmers are doing a great job feeding the entire world. And it's something that we should really be proud of. Something that I think is out of balance is the small farmers in our communities. We can also do a really great job feeding ourselves and having our members of our state have access to farms again and get reacquainted with our food and where it comes from and feed ourselves again.
Key Ingredients is funded by a grant from the North Dakota Humanities Council, a nonprofit independent state partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and by the members of Prairie Public.
To order a DVD copy of Key Ingredients, call 1-800-359-6900 or visit our online store at www.prairiepublic.org and click on Shop.